Welcome to Motorhome Rehab Ranch. Do you have a GMC? Would you like to have one or just learn more about them? You're in the right place. And a special shout out to my ranch hands that help us support us by paying for the videos and asking questions and working on their coach. If you'd like to be a member, a ranch hand, at the end of this video we'll talk more about that. We're specifically devoted to the GMC Motorhome built from 1973 to 1978 only, okay? So let's get into something that may help you understand a little bit more about the GMC. What do you think? Hey guys, it's Jim Bounds at Co-op Motorworks and Motorhome Rehab Ranch on Patreon. And see, I'm ready this time. I know she's turning it on high. Had a comment. We've talked a little bit about fuel tanks and all this kind of stuff, but he wanted to talk specifically about plumbing the fuel tanks to the carburetor or to the motor, okay? So let's do that. Just talk about getting the fuel from the tank to the piston, okay? All right, well, of course, there are two ways that happens. One's through a quadrijet carburetor and one's through fuel injection. And since there are more carburetors out there right now, so let's talk about carburetors, okay? I love my quadrijet. Whoa, I love my quadrijet carburetor. It's been a good friend to me, and after this much time, I know how I'm smarter than this sucker. Okay, I can make it go. So let's talk about. We don't want to get into. Let's not muddy the waters with fuel injection right now. Let's talk about carburetors. You know. Well, in the past, getting fuel from carburetor wasn't a big deal. You got a metal tank. There's gasoline in it. There's a line. Goes to a filter. Gets the junk out of it, goes to the mechanical fuel pump, then goes to the carburetor, okay? And pretty much they work pretty good over the years, you know. Bubba and Scooter can keep those babies going. But the government has perpetrated a Darwinistic natural selection process on our dinosaur belch fire motors, okay? They've changed the fuel on us. They've changed the parameters, okay? It's like you're running a mile and they make it a mile and a quarter while you're running. So what's happened? Well, the fuel formulation was hot. In other words, you set an open pail of gasoline right there in the barn, shut the door, the next morning, half of it would be evaporated. You'd have flammable straw. You have dead rats, and somebody would be mad because you got to fumigate the barn. Well, do that today. The fuel does not evaporate like it used to. The EPA does not want it to pollute. Gas today is more like diesel. Diesel sits there all day in a bucket, won't go anywhere. You can throw a match in it, no problem. But when you pressurize diesel is when it gets viable, okay? Then it gets very flammable. Well, gas today has changed, and we don't want to talk about the FI word. Let's talk about keeping our carburetors going. Problem with this new fuel, it has a lower boiling point than fuel used to have. So that means when it gets hot, it will vapor lock. It will boil. That's what vapor lock is. And that's a problem for a carburetor and for our conventional system. So what are we going to do? We're going to cuss at it and pull over until it cools down? No, well, I've done that. Works. We want to build in some countermeasures. We want to build in some backups that when we have problems with this carburetor, we can address them. Okay. From this first thing, this is your hose. This is your inlet hose right here. Doesn't look like yours probably because yours is a steel line, goes down to the carburetor. Okay. All right. Well, in that steel line, here's your radiator. All that heat's going through here. Fuel's inside that steel line. And sometimes you'll have a problem with the fuel boiling right here. Okay? Fuel's too hot. Okay? This fuel line is a Teflon lined, doesn't leak, braided stainless. In other words, it is secured and is safe. And this black thing here is a 700-degree heat shield. They call it a pyro shield. And it's there to keep the fuel that comes out of that mechanical fuel pump cool until it gets into the carburetor. Also, bonus is, you know, this corner right here where you've got your thermostat housing, this bend right here is pretty obtuse. Now, when you bend metal, it fractures. So that means that this fuel line, this steel bent, tightly bent, fractured fuel line is 45 years old. Change it. Get this fuel line. It's like 35 bucks or 40 bucks or something like that. And if that is a problem, this is a Band-Aid. This is a Band-Aid to keep the fuel from getting hot before it gets to Mr. Carburetor. Okay? That's one. Next one. Say you're going to cook beans. What? Yeah. You're in the kitchen and your wife's going to cook beans. But you have to cook the beans at a higher water temperature than water will boil. Well, how do you do that? You put it in a pressure cooker. What's that do? It makes pressure inside. When you pressurize, it lowers the boiling point. I mean, it raises the boiling point. So, if your fuel is bubbling, if it's boiling, if you can pressurize it, it will stop, right? Well, what we do is on the front tank, you have two tanks, right? But forget the two-tank thing. There's one tank. Both tanks fill together until you get below a quarter. And I don't know about you, but this thing's too big to push. A tow bill's going to melt my wallet. I don't want to call a flatbed truck or a Landau truck on the highway at 2 in the morning, okay? Don't ever go below a quarter of a tank of gas. And you'll never have to worry about it, okay? All right. So, on the front tank, there's two lines coming to the AB switch in your coach. The button on the dash that says main auxiliary. When you have it on main, it's reading the rear sender. That's what your gauge is reading. And the fuel is coming out of the rear tank, going straight through the AB solenoid. There's a switch there. Straight through home run up to the mechanical fuel pump in this. That's the line, okay? When you push that button on the dash, it says auxiliary fuel. The AB solenoid here energizes, if it works, but you may want to change it. It energizes. It pulls fuel from the front tank, right? But we know that it doesn't matter because you're never going to go below quarter tank anyway. So when you push that auxiliary tank, actually we're going to have two things happen. One, the AB solenoid is going to switch. And two, we're going to have a cheap little small electric fuel pump right here that's hooked to that. So when you push that switch, the pump comes on, pulls fuel out of the front tank, the solenoid shunts it to the front. What have you done? Now you're pushing fuel, you're pressurizing fuel, right, through the line, which will stop the vapor lock, which will stop the pressure. We're going to add pressure, we're going to raise the boiling point, and we're going to get rid of the vapor lock, okay? So you got a countermeasure button on the dash. You're driving along, you pull up to a toll plaza, you take off and it starts to bump. That's vapor lock, brother. Back off on the don't push your foot on the gas. Back off and push that button. Count to 5. It'll take off because it pushes the fuel through. It pushes the boiled fuel. It makes it where it doesn't boil anymore. It gets to the carburetor, runs through. Why did it vapor lock? Because when you stopped, the engine heat built up real fast. And that's what caused the heat and the vapor lock, okay? As long as you're driving, the heat's evacuated, there's no problem. So when you drop off the highway, how about this? When you get ready to drop off the highway, go push the button. When you drop off, there's no vapor lock. You don't have to worry about it. No stress. You didn't chew up the seat or anything. And you go on. When you leave the toll plaza and everything's good, turn off the button. You say, well, I'll just leave it on all the time. So, no, because this is something that changes the parameters in the fuel line. If you've got it changed, then it'll vapor lock to that. Now you don't have any option. So turn it off when you don't need it. Turn it on when you do. In the summer here in Florida, when I come up to the toll booth, I turn it on. Go through the toll booth, about 30 seconds, turn it off. I've never had a problem. On the highway, it's off. Drop into town, turn it on. Drive around a little bit, get the heat away, turn it off. It's a countermeasure, okay? All right. Third thing, the fuel sits in the fuel line until the carburetor needs it, right? The mechanical fuel pump that's on this thing, you say, well, how does it know to only put 6.5 psi pressure into this? How does it know that? It's a dumb metal box. Why does it know? How does it know to 6.5 psi? The diaphragm, it's a diaphragm pump, and the diaphragm is connected to an arm that moves up and down. That's how the thing works. Well, this arm is not connected to the diaphragm. There's a spring here that when there's a certain amount of pressure, this doesn't move anymore. The spring moves. As soon as the pressure goes down, then it'll move this a little more. That's how the mechanical fuel pump knows that it needs to put 6.5 psi of pressure. But the thing is, the pump doesn't know air or fuel. So if you have a vapor lock and it's over 6.5 psi of pressure, that pump's not going to pump fuel until the fuel line gets below 6.5 psi. You see what I'm saying? So when you flip that pump on, it pushes fuel through, pushes it up to the mechanical fuel pump, pushes it up, and that gets rid of your vapor lock. Right? Well, what would happen if the fuel did not stay into the fuel line? I mean, it returns. That's what fuel injection, FI. That's what fuel injection does. It samples off some fuel to the engine and shunts the rest of it back to the tank. It returns. It has a recirculating system. So the fuel doesn't sit in the line all the time and get hot and boil. Okay? Our mechanical fuel pump in our motorhome has 2 ports, 2 fittings, in and out. On the high performance, or on station wagons, they call that high performance. Station wagons and on big trucks and performance cars, they have a 3rd port. It's called a 3-port mechanical fuel pump. The 3rd port is a little 1/4-inch nipple. You put a clamp on it. It's a 1/4-inch hose. Now what happens in that mechanical pump, this arm is attached to the diaphragm. It pumps. But over here is a return hose with a check valve. This pumps all the time. But when it gets 6.5 psi, it shunts it back to the tank. So the fuel is going through all the time, right? It's not a 2-port pump. That's what we normally have. You go look at your coach, you probably have one. We want a 3-port pump. Now you may look at yours and you'll see it'll be a 3-port and they blocked off the other port. Hook it up. What we do is on the 1/2-inch rubber line going up to your fuel, where you put your fuel in, cut that line, get a T. You got a 1/2-inch, 1/2-inch, and a 1/4-inch takeoff on it. You run that 1/4-inch line from your mechanical fuel pump over to there. Bob's your uncle, the fuel's returning. Now the fuel doesn't sit in the line. Chances of having a vapor lock are much less. Okay? So I would do belts and suspenders. I would have a electric fuel pump here. So you got something to do to push a button. At least you can do something rather than a screen. Boo! There you go. And I would put a a recirculating fuel pump because you know that the fuel is more susceptible to temperature. I have customers that tell me, that live in California, tell me they don't drive in the desert in the summer during the day because it unnerves them to hear the fuel boiling in the tank. Yeah, I can dig that. You know, it'd be kind of scary. It's not a big deal unless the vapor starts to, we don't go there. But so on a carburetor, to get fuel to it, it's a new world. We got to work with fuel that boils, right? Of course, you need a filter. There's a 5-micron filter right in the front of this carburetor because Rochester knew that if anything more than 5 microns of dirt got in your carburetor, carburetor's toast. So you have an ultimate 5-micron filter, which we talked about in a video. Always have an extra one. This is a Wix 330-48. Always have an extra one because when this clogs up, baby, you're done. Don't go. Okay? So you have a filter here, but I would put a filter before the AB solenoid, before the electric fuel pump on the auxiliary tank. I would put a 10-micron filter there to keep anything else out of the rest of the system. Okay? So for a carburetor, that's how your fuel delivery works. Now you've got to deal with the rusted tanks because it's ethanol with this fuel. That's why you have filters. You have to deal with the fuel boiling easier. That's why you have the pump and the recirculating thing. This is another belts and suspenders to make sure that the fuel, when it gets here, that the heat from the radiator doesn't get the fuel too hot here. Other than that, a carburetor works the very best the first day it's put on, and it ramps down in its quality from there. It never gets better. It doesn't get good 1 week in bed. It goes like this. And when your carburetor's starting to leak from the accelerator pump, or you start seeing fuel around here, or it starts to smell when you're driving, or like that, carburetor needs more than a rebuild. Carburetor needs to be remanufactured because it's 45 years old. The butterflies, the shafts that go through here to the butterflies could be worn. I mean, it needs to be taken apart by somebody that really knows what they're doing, put on a flow bench to make sure that it flows the CFM it needs, puts on a 3-gas analyzer on a motor to be sure that this carburetor is mixing 14.1 and all that kind of stuff. Your 45-year-old carburetor can still work if you have countermeasures because of the fuel and it's up to snuff. Okay? Carburetors, I think it's like $230 or something like that. You send me yours, I will have yours built. No question if the number's right or whatever. It will be your carburetor and it'll look just like this. Okay? So if you want to do that, you want to stay with it, I'm with you, brother. I am into, El, is that you over there snoring? My goodness. So, you know, I'm with you on carburetors. I like carburetors. I have one too. And so that's how you make them work. Now, if you have fuel injection, remember our talk is about fuel delivery. All right? If you have fuel injection, you have to have a high pressure pump. And if that high pressure pump loses pressure, in other words, if you go around a turn, something like that, you lose pressure, it shuts down. Okay? We went through all kinds of gyrations trying to make a tank that wouldn't slosh. There's no way on God's earth, through the physics that we have to live in, that you can take a 4.5-inch tank that goes from side to side of your motorhome and keep it from sloshing. It is impossible. It doesn't work. Okay? We tried. We're actually on 9 iterations now. Doesn't work. On fuel injection, every fuel injection system, I don't care if it's an old one, an old Howell system, or an Atomic, or a new Sniper, or a Phytec. Yes, we're Phytec dealers. Yes, I use Phytec. Phytec has produced an accumulator tank. They call it a force fuel. I'm not trying to sell you a force fuel. I'm trying to tell you that if you have fuel injection, you cannot pull directly from the tanks, because you will slosh. The electric fuel pump will lose fuel, you'll lose pressure, and it will shut down. It will shut down. You have to have an accumulator tank, that the main tanks keep the accumulator tank full, and the pressure for your throttle body comes out of the accumulator tank. It's a half gallon. So when you go around a long turn, you go down a long hill, it doesn't matter that the wick goes dry on your fuel tank that's only 4.5 inches deep. It doesn't matter, because it's being pulled out of the half gallon over here. Okay? I gotta tell you, I'm gonna really make some people mad, but you know, I'm the guy that says the emperor's wearing no clothes. Okay? I don't care. I know where the skeletons are because I helped bury some of them. Okay? If you run a fuel injection system of any kind, you need an accumulator system for your fuel delivery to be sure that it doesn't shut down. Period. Exclamation mark. I dropped my microphone, but I'm too fond of it. Okay? You try to do it any other way, you will be frustrated. How do I know that? Ask me how I know that. We've tried. We've tried everything. We've got people mad at us because we're trying. They wouldn't work with us. This is a big deal. We're trying to take our old engines, our old motorhomes that have the wrong fuel tank, that have the wrong delivery system for the fuel today. No cars have carburetors. Why? Because the fuel's not made for a carburetor. It's got to be pressurized and injected. Why do we get fuel injection? Because that is the right adapter for the fuel. How do we get fuel to the fuel injection? Through an accumulator system. How do I know? We've tried. Okay? Facebook, there's a big thread about that. All over the place. Got to tell you guys, I really don't say much on that thing because then I just get everybody more upset. But if you don't use, right now, the only one that's available is a Phytech force fuel system. If you do not use that, you run the risk of your fuel injection system shutting down. Period. Okay? So, fuel system's real easy there. Fuel delivery, very important. You got to get the gas from the tank to the motor. That's how you do it. If you have any other questions, fuel's changed, right? You can't use regular cheap fuel hose because alcohol dries out synthetic rubber. It cracks it, makes it hard. You have to use a hose, fuel line, that has a silicone line to it that won't be affected as much to the alcohol. What do we use? And I'm not selling this brand. Gates makes a line of their hoses called Barricade hose. It is specifically made for ethanol fuel. You have 56 feet of vent hose alone under that sucker. There's a bunch of rubber under there. It needs to be ethanol resistant. I think the number is 31R, but we use Gates Barricade hose. It's everywhere. I would use that. You're gonna buy probably 2 or 3 rolls of 50 foot of 3/8. You're gonna buy. I get 1 roll of quarter, or check the line going to your generator. Some people have put 5/8. Some people have put quarter. Get that. Get about 8 feet of 1/2 inch. That's for the thing. And then there's some weird rubber pieces for the fuel inlet that are weird sizes. Give us a call. We've got those. So that's all about fuel delivery. If you have other questions or you want to do it yourself and you're upside down and you're looking for a left-handed smoke bender, call me. I'll get you out of there. All right? All right. Well, there's another one that's in the bag. And thanks for the comment. This is from all of your comments. Give me some more. Let's get this database going. Talk to you later. Please become a ranch hand. Bye-bye.